Righty. So this is your first development project that you have for our class. And the way I'm going to start this is really just understanding the importance of it in your overall grade. So all three, meaning there's three, weigh 50% of your grade, which means each one is between 16 and 17% of your grade. So it's important. And it's important for a lot of different reasons besides your grade. And I want to tell you just a quick story as I scroll down to find the requirements. I had a student who was interviewing after taking several of my classes, and he came back and told me that the code reviews were so helpful because it helped him know how to talk about code, and that was an important part of his interview. So just know that this work is meaningful in helping you develop your skills, because here's the goal. We want you to take what you've learned, and that's really what my write-up says here in the sections we've covered so far, and create something. And I'll show you what I've created as an example, but I've added a few things to the requirements. Now I'm recording this in the week before it's due, so to give you the heads up, and the sooner you work on this, the sooner you come and talk to me, the better. Okay. So variables that are locally scoped and global, local meaning block scope and global. And you don't, if, and we're trying to get away from global unless you have a reason. So at least have one just so I can see that and that declare strings, numbers, booleans, and objects, and actually arrays, but I have array as its own item here. And I say at least, and this is like the minimum, right, of two functions with at least one function returning a value to use in another. I've shown this before, but I will show it again today. And my display on page, and you do need to use that, I have as one of the requirements, does not count as one of those. You can also use methods here, right? So Andrew did a great job of covering how to write functions inside of objects that are called methods. So you do need to implement arrays in your code and update them with methods Andrew demonstrated in the course, or use methods of your choice, but you do need to, and here's the way you want to think about this, right? Is you want to get user input. Now you're actually going to code up that user input, and you're going to see how I did that in a minute. So you're getting input from the user, you're processing that input, and then you're storing it somehow, some way. You don't have to store all the input you're getting. You will see in my example how I do this, but you want to store, update you get information from the user, you process it, you store it in this case an array. Could be an array of objects, right? Implement looping and produce meaningful output. So this is where each of you are going to approach this differently. You may look at my example and think, oh, that's too much. It doesn't have to be that, but I do want to give you an example, because the idea here is that you want meaningful output. Display output on page, meaning wherever you have a console.log, although you can still use that, use my display on function for this step, right? It needs to be different than the code you've been writing from the Learn Together work. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. And then use comments to document your work. So I'm going to go through my example, and then at the end, I will come back and talk about the code review process. So here's my example of a rock, scissors, paper game. Now I've been showing other types of concepts that I've implemented, but in this case, I've done a game. It does not mean you need to do a game, but games are fun to do. This could be any kind of output, right? So this is, and I'll show you this by refreshing it, is one thing I did is that I randomly picked the number of times the game would be, not picked, but determined a random number of times the game would be played. And then I picked a random player from 3 players that I've set up. So this time you can see the part I ran it right before I showed you. It had 5 games. And then at the end, I gave some statistics. So if I run the code again, this time, how many times was it played? It was only played 4 times, right? So it's the idea of randomness. And I'll show you how I did that. So I just gave the result, who played, how many times they've played, how many times they've won, and their percentage. So of course that's going to go up hopefully over time. Although look, Jack lost again. and then Jack, oh, lost for a third time, poor Jack. And then end of game. So let's see, did I play? I didn't remember seeing my output there. Oh, that was my game, right. So I actually won that round. So anyway, I want to show you what I did. So that's my output, and I'm going to actually provide my output so that you can take a look, right? So I'm going to come over here to source, pull this over so we can take a look at it. And all of my action starts here. And this is a very common pattern that I want to see. I should put this in the requirements, but I'm showing you here, right, is the idea that your functions, your declarations are on the top of the code, and generally on the bottom is where you're actually starting your code from its, how it runs. What it does. So for me, play random times, I'm going to set a breakpoint here. I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And then, of course, my code's going to stop here. And I'll just briefly walk you through this. Again, the more you do this, the better you get at it. And meaning the better you get at actually looking at code. So if I walk through play random times, what it's going to do, I'm going to call a get random integer, and I'm actually giving it a bound. So I want between 1 and 11, so 1 and 10. So I want to determine that. So if I go up here, and this is one of my functions, and this is a great example of a function and that's the reason you write them, is so that you can reuse them. And again, it doesn't have to be anything major here, as I pass in a min and a max in this code. And I'll show you some of my documents in a little bit, are my comments that I wrote, but basically I got this off of MD, Microsoft Developer Network, MDN. I believe that's where I got this, but it's basically just going to return a number based on the bounds that I give it. So now that I'm back here, it runs it. So now I can see that I'm going to play, oh, this is 10, so that's cool. So we're not going to do 10 times. I won't make you sit through all that. You can do this yourself, but I'm just going to do a regular for loop here, where I determine an initial starting of I less than or equal to the number of games, and I just iterate one at a time. So now going through here, and first thing I'm going to just do is I'm going to call the display on page just to output that. And you know how the display on page works, so I'm just going to jump over that. And so now I'm going to use that same get random function. Now, you don't have to do it this way. You can just call your whatever your functions are. The reason I did it randomly is it gave it a little more interest. You do not have to do this. I'm just giving you an example. Again, I've just shown you the random, so I'm not going to show you that again. So I get a random int. And then here, what I'm doing is it's based on that int is the player that I'm playing with. Now I'm going to scroll up and show you. I have 3 objects that represent 3 players, just with some basic data, some ID, name, and email. Okay, so in this case, once I determine what my random integer is, then I'm going to say play game with that player. Okay, so if it's random 1, if it's ran int equals 1, now remember triple equals in JavaScript, strictly equals is typically what you use. The only time you would use single equals is not actually equal, it's actually assignment. So make sure, because I know that's thrown a couple of you. So I'm going to play with that player. All right, so in this case, what was my random int was 2, so we'll see this in the code, else if it's 2, there we go. So now we're going to call play game. We're passing in that object, and now we're going to get, again, you see me use this randomness a bit in this game, which makes sense in a game. So now I'm going to get a random number, but this time, because it's between 0 and 2, so I can, actually, I'm going to jump over that because you've already seen that work, right? So I'm going to go ahead and walk through that step, and now it's passing in game choice, because what it's going to do is going to basically take in the integer and determine if it's rock, scissors, or paper, and then return that. So we'll go ahead and go down here and walk through this, because now it's saying your game choice, right, is now scissors, and now we're going to determine the same process, and I'm just going to jump over that to determine player choice. Okay, and I'm going to do result here. Oh, actually, I should have shown you result, but you're passing in player, game choice, player choice, and we can just scroll up here to see it. Here's the get result where I'm passing in the player, game choice, player choice, would again randomly selected. And then I'd go through the logic if it's rock, right? And then I just have a series of if, else, and then returns, and then return the string. But the other really important thing that I'm doing, and this is the idea of capturing that user input, even though I'm simulating it through randomness, is actually to do gameplay detail, which is an array that I set, and I'll show you that. It's up here. So I've set an empty array that I then push values into, and the values that I'm doing here are objects, and it's the player ID, the result, and then I also put in, and again, it's based on if it was, what the player selected and what the game selected, and then I put in the result and the player choice and the game choice. So this is the object that I'm pushing into that array, and then I return a string with some information. Okay, so let me go back down here. So that's my result. So in this case, my result, I'm just trying to show you here. Not sure why that's not coming out, but that's okay. So now I'm going to filter. So now that I've played, right, I'm actually going to filter filter by player. So now when you first start, this kind of doesn't make sense because you only have one, but as you have more games and because it's actually going to filter through that gameplay detail, right, to actually get filtered by player. So I get that actual array of just those filtered by player. Okay. All right. So then I do that. Cool. So then I can see good. In this case, it makes sense. I only have one in there for player two because I was only playing the first game. And now I just call display game output by passing in that filter with the result and the player name. Okay. Now, some of you are looking at this and going, that is a lot, Rio, right? So it's really about expressing your ideas, right? So again, please walk through my code, look at it. This is just displaying the game output, right? Let's just walk. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm displaying it on the page, right? So what happens is once I get through my displays, because I'm just doing some displays right here, just displaying, and you can see it coming out over here, right? Then I'm going to go back down to that bottom loop and I'm going to go to my next round, right? Because now we're going to the next one. So again, we're going to play 10 times. Randomness is great because it gives you that idea of, because games are very random. So obviously you can see on mine, I wrote more than two functions. Remember, two functions is a minimum. Definitely, the thing is too, you're all at different levels. Here's my thing is push yourself, really extend yourself. You really want to learn this because this is the part that you've come for, which is really to be able to create something. So give this the time that it needs. Okay. All right. So I've shown you mine. I've I've gone through the requirements here, right? Let me just show you the code in the editor so you can see. I am going to give you, let me just say this, I am going to give you a link. I've actually put my code out on the public repo, but where you need to put yours, and this is important, is your code, you want to create a new directory called dev. You can put dev0 or dev_0, as long as it says dev0. And then in your directory, you need to have an index page and an app.js, okay? That you link your app.js from your index, right? So because you're going to output this, again, you can still use console log, but I want to see some of your output in here. All right, so here's an example of comments. You can read through and look at an example of my comments. Comments helps people understand your code, right? And so I've written some to give you an example here of what those would look like. Okay, I didn't absolutely do each one, but I gave enough to give that overview so people could read it and understand it. Okay, so If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Hangout is a great way to do this as well because other students probably have similar questions. All right, so let's go to the home stretch here. So what do you need to do? You actually have to schedule an appointment with me to come in, bring me working code. And this is an important part, right? If you don't bring me working code, that's up to 50% off of your points possible. So let's just, and I'm not going to release the schedule because I need to talk to my night class about some times I've put in their class time. But, and by the time you see this, it may have already been released, but know that on the 14th at noon, I will release this schedule. But let me just kind of show you what it looks like, okay? Is that I'm going to have sessions starting Tuesday because I realized that Monday was a holiday. I will have sessions. Here's the times. Here's the meeting type. So in this case, you can either do an online or a face-to-face meeting. If you're doing face-to-face, here's my location. And then sometimes you can see only online is available. I am going to have Wednesday starting at 4:30 to 7:30 is a good chunk. Thursday, there's going to be some during the day, some in the early evening. And here's the key is if you're waiting until here, know that this is after the due date because this is due by midnight on the 20th. So the sooner you come see me, the better, right? So that because you and I could talk about code, I could give you some suggestions and you can fix it before the due date. So there's a really big incentive for you to come see me. The sooner, the better. Okay. So what you would do is you'd put your name down for this. And again, you know, the sooner you come see me, the better. You put the meeting type that you want, because if you are doing an online, I have to set up a hangout between you and I. And let me just say this. Once I set up a hangout between you and I, that hangout is not intended for you to communicate with me directly. That hangout is intended only for video calls. The campus actually, I can't do chatting without giving the campus a copy of that. Anyway, more involved than you want to know, but just know that those hangout, I will ask you for your Gmail. I'll send you a little information. Okay, if you're doing online. So obviously if you're doing face-to-face, we will just pull up your code and look at it. Okay. Now, if we get towards the end of this and we don't have enough, right? So part of this is also planning ahead on your part, right? Is that we'll just work through that. We'll figure that out. But I'm just knowing that this will work out fine. I do have a meeting Friday morning. I had some earlier sessions. So if I need to go a little later on Friday, I will do that. Okay. So if you don't do a code review, you just submit code, that's 50% off because, again, the importance I weigh to this. So what will happen during the code reviews is that you will walk me through your code. You will need to describe it to me in the way that it functions, answer any questions that I have about it. Again, I've already talked about the sessions will be face-to-face or online. Okay, so I know this can seem daunting. And, you know, anytime we have to create something that we're going to show to somebody else, it is. There's just no doubt about that. But the sooner you work on it, the sooner you come talk to me. Because you could schedule a session with me even before the due date just to chat about it. What I'd probably do is say, please, the sooner you reach out to me, the sooner I can figure out how many students want to do that. And then I'll have to modify these as we go. If that's the case, I really encourage that. So I'm totally open to figuring that out. All right, I hope this gives you enough. Make sure you're following my directions because those are part of the points. Making sure you're putting it in the right location. Like I said, I'm going to give you access to mine in public so you can just check it out if you have any questions just to see how I did it. All right, I will talk to you soon and look forward to looking and talking with you about the code you've written. Have a good one. Bye.